Killer Innovations Podcast for Tuesday, June 14th, 2005, coming to you from foggy San Francisco. Hello, this is Phil McKinney, and welcome to the podcast. As I said in the introduction, I'm bringing you this podcast from foggy San Francisco. Since the last podcast, I've been to Chicago. I then flew to Naples, Italy. I then flew to Milan, Italy. I then flew back to Washington, D.C., and now have flown to San Francisco. And I'm actually in San Francisco this entire week. So, again, apologize for being another day late. So now this is Tuesday. It's actually, coming up on 1 o'clock in the morning, East Coast time, on Tuesday. So another day late. This thing seems to keep creeping. But hopefully this weekend, Father's Day weekend, I'll actually be able to catch up and get the podcast back on its regular schedule of being uploaded over the weekend. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. First off, I want to say thanks for those of you who came out to SuperCom in Chicago, and we had a chance to meet. A number of you came to the speech on Tuesday, and I know I met one of you in the speech on Wednesday, and a couple of you ran into on the show floor. So again, thanks for making the effort to search me out so we have a chance to talk. I appreciate the feedback and the chance to meet with you directly face to face. Again, as I said in the previous podcast, I'm going to try to put up my schedule of appearances so that if you do find yourself at one of the major events, then we can actually hopefully touch base. I think I'm doing a number of really smaller events. I think my next major event that I will be at will be the IBC International Broadcasters Convention, September in Amsterdam. And then I'll be doing a 3G conference in Hong Kong also in September. So the summer will be kind of a little bit light, but again, my plan is I'll try to post those up on the blog. So if you do happen to be at one of these conventions, we can hopefully find a chance to get together. Also, over the last couple of weeks, I've received a number of emails with regards to the ID3 tags. The ID3 tags are the embedded information that goes into the MP3 files that your playlist manager uses, whether that be Windows Media 10 or Apple iTunes, and received a number of suggestions on changes to the ID3 tags to make it easier for you to search, store, archive the podcasts. Also received a number of suggestions with regards to the file/show name to shorten it up and change the way it gets displayed so that you can actually see it on the screen of your MP3 player, whether you have an iPod, or an MP3 player from that run in Windows Media or an iRiver or whatever the case might be. So, based on the number of feedback and the changes, my current plan is to modify the ID3 tags and modify the file and show name starting with the first podcast in July. This gives you some time to get ready if you are using anything that's currently in the ID3 tags to do any kind of cataloging or archiving. So just be aware that the first podcast in July, I'm going to be modifying the ID3 tags and the file and show name. If you're not doing anything special with that information today, you're just taking your podcast, moving it into your directory, and having it appear automatically in the playlists, then there's going to be no change to you whatsoever. If, however, you're doing something special with this podcast, such as keeping it around, putting it into a special place for an archive, then you'll need to possibly make some changes. Okay? So again, that will occur in the first podcast of July. We'll be making the changes to the ID3 tags and the file show name based on the feedback from a number of you. For today's podcast, we're going to have the normal 3 segments. The first segment, we're going to talk about the end-to-end innovation process. What happens or what are processes beyond the brainstorming ideation phase all the way through the commercialization phase, and what kind of return or benefit or productivity gain you should expect for organizations that implement an end-to-end innovation process. In segment 2, the weak signals, we're going to talk about perspective and how looking at things a little bit differently can reveal weak signals, early hints on possible killer innovations. And in the third segment, as usual, we will have the killer question of the week. So let's go ahead and get started talking about the end-to-end process. Over the last couple of weeks, I've received a number of emails and actually a couple of Skype calls from people looking for input on end-to-end innovation processes. What processes have proven successful, what kind of returns an organization could expect, thoughts about different phases of that process, etc. So what we're going to talk about, and this is actually going to probably stretch over a couple of podcasts, talking about the end-to-end process and what are some of the things you should plan for or include in your own innovation methodology. So first off, what kind of returns can you expect from an end-to-end innovation process? There have been a number of studies that have been put out there, but one study that I've seen quoted a number of times has shown that an innovation investment yields a 30% annual return, meaning if I put in X amount of dollars, then I can look at a 30% annual return compared to an 8 to 10% return on investment in physical capital, such as in new machines, new infrastructure, office space, etc. Now, here's a word of caution when you start looking at these kinds of studies and this kinds of information is the key with innovation is that it is a long-term return. Year one, you may not get much of a return. Year two, you'll start seeing some return. Year three, you'll start seeing a growing return. The key here is that you have to focus on an innovation pipeline. And once you've created this pipeline, this source of innovations that are working its way through the process, through your methodology, you have to continue to feed the pipeline. If you stop that investment, whether that means management has made the decision to meet short-term financial goals and therefore reduce its investment in the pipeline, you'll continue to get return because of things that are already in the pipeline, but at some point in the future, that pipeline is going to go dry. You're not going to get the return. You're not going to get that output if you don't continue to feed your innovation process. So again, studies have shown that the innovation yields a 30% annual return, but only once you have a process in place and you continue to invest and fill that pipeline. So what is the corporate view? I mean, I'm guessing from the emails and from the phone conversations that a number of you are trying to use these kinds of numbers to justify to your organization, to your management team, to your department heads about putting together a more formalized innovation process. Well, a survey put out by Diamond Cluster International, one of the major consulting firms based in Chicago, did a survey on the corporate view of innovation. And it's interesting, 87% of the CEOs, and these are CEOs of major corporations, rank innovation as one of their top 5 priorities. I don't think that's too surprising. Interesting, though, is that these same executives boast that their companies excel at innovation. So it's interesting the fact that everybody recognizes that it's important. Secondly, they all boast that they're good at it. However, these same executives couldn't differentiate between incremental improvements and breakthroughs. So they took a pretty broad definition when they said they were good at innovation, yet when you sat down and you drilled into that next question, they couldn't differentiate really between That little increment, change the color from black to blue versus breakthrough innovations, fundamental shifts in their business and their customers or their markets served. And then it's also interesting to note that very few of these executives said that they had any kind of structured approach to innovation. So their innovation process was purely almost a serendipitous kind of exercise. So here you are. They rank it as one of the top 5 priorities. They boast that they're good at it. At the same time, when you talk to the executives, they can't differentiate between incremental and breakthrough. And they also fess up that they don't have really a structured approach to innovation. And the innovation, just as any other process, and whether it's program management or customer service processes, any structured, let's put it this way, anything that's important to the fundamental value of the business can be structured, needs a formal methodology, and not a formal methodology where it forces you down a certain path, but you need to put structure around it in order to know where you're at, what value you're getting from that process, and to make sure that you are giving it the right amount of focus and time that's needed. So let's talk about the impact of structured innovation. And again, this is a survey that was done by the Product Development Management Association. And basically it looked at companies that had structured innovation processes and companies that did not have a structured innovation process. So, and what they classified they put companies into 2 categories: the best and the rest. Okay? And so we're going to talk through their survey results. So in the category of the number of firms that they classified as being best in class, there were 85 firms in that grouping. As for the rest of them, there were 298 firms. Okay, now when they measured success, when they mean by measured success, meaning ideas that went from ideation all the way through to commercial launch. Now, for the best, the percentage hit rate for success was just shy of 80%, 79.8% success rate, versus the rest, about a 50-50. It's actually about 52% success rate. So meaning, if I have a structured process, I get almost an 80% success rate going from ideation to commercial launch. If I don't have a formal process, at best I'm a 50-50 success rate. As for the best, the percentage of sales from innovations, meaning these are innovations for new products, not revenue coming from existing products, but revenue coming from new products. If I'm one of the firms that's classified as the best, I'm going to get about 49% of my revenue from innovations, percentage of sales. As for the rest, I'm only going to get 25%. So again, with a formalized process, improving the hit rate of going from ideation to success, meaning commercial launch, I'm going to drive a larger percentage of my sales from innovations, 49 to 25. Also interesting is it almost mirrors the same as percentage of profits. Percentage of profits is 49 to 22. 49 to 22. Also, when you structure or you formalize an innovation process, how many ideas do you have to get to drive success? How many raw ideas, meaning not the ideas that you've qualified and you drive, but how many raw ideas in order to find one that is going to drive you to be successful? For companies that have a formal process, it's 3.5 ideas for every success. For those that don't have a formal process, it's 8.5. So I need 8.5 ideas to find the one good one. Versus if I have a formalized process, whether that's killer innovations, killer ideas, killer questions, whatever approach you want to use to create the ideas. For the best, it's 3.5. For the rest, it's 8.5 ideas for every success. And so with that, you can see that by creating a structured innovation process, you significantly increase your percentage of success rate to 80% for best at 50-50 for the rest. You increase the percentage of sales from innovations, you increase the percentage of profits from innovations, and you take fewer ideas to get to that success versus kind of the rest of the firms just doing kind of a scattered gun and trying to stumble across the idea versus having a formalized process. Now, what would be a formalized process? Now, we're not going to have enough time to go through this in today's podcast, but I'll delve into this deeper into some upcoming podcasts. But one of the processes, and again, when they went back to the best, the firms that the survey ranked as being the best firms, and asked to take a look at what methodology they're using, it isn't so much ranked about, what are you using, a De Bono process, or for previous clients of mine that have licensed the Killer Innovations process to use that as an internal methodology. It isn't so much what the methodology or what the process is. What they quickly found out is it's the methodology for managing the process that leads to success. And when they surveyed the best companies, the companies that we talked about just a few minutes ago, that got a much higher success rate, got a significant increase in sales, etc. What was the commonality for those firms that drove their success? And it was interesting. 71% of the best firms use some form of a milestone stage gate process to introduce new products and services. Now, I'm a big believer of gate milestone processes. And for those of you who aren't familiar with gate milestone processes, it's basically setting up stages where you have very well-defined gates that are clearly go, no-go, with a well-defined criteria for that gate to be cleared and for the next phase to begin. That gate could trigger additional investment. It could trigger whatever criteria you want to use as part of that process, but it forces you at certain phases to kind of stop, reevaluate. Is this an idea? Is this an innovation that should go to the next phase, or does it not meet the criteria? And you stop and you refocus your efforts on ideas that do meet those gates milestones in order to drive a higher success rate. Otherwise, what you tend to find is people become passionate about an idea. They let their emotions take over. And if you particularly have got a very passionate sponsor who also happens to be an executive or somebody who carries a lot of influence, you tend to make investments, you tend to commit resources way beyond where you should, knowing that the idea should have been killed much earlier in the process. But because there's no formalized methodology to force that kind of step back, reevaluate, and clearly make a go, no-go to go to the next phase. So I'll cover milestone gate processes and share with you kind of a gate milestone process template that I've used that has been successful for me. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. You really need to think about your organization and how you set it up. But I'll work on pulling together or sanitizing a gate milestone process that hopefully then you can use to modify and adjust and use it within your own organization. And also, in a future podcast, I'll talk more about how do you structure your own custom methodology that meets your own criteria. But for now, if you are trying to justify or put together a proposal for your organization about creating a structured innovation process, Use the numbers that use the numbers that we previously discussed, such as, the percentage of success rate, percentage of sales, percentage of profits, the number of ideas to get to a success. So therefore, you can show that return rate, which says I can get a 30% return rate versus 8 to 10% for capital investment. So 30% on innovation investment versus 8 to 10% on capital investment. And management needs to recognize the value of innovation and be willing to make those kinds of resources available to drive the growth of their business. Moving on to segment 2. Segment 2, we're going to talk about changing perspective. Part of the challenge we all have when we're looking for weak signals, for new ideas, kind of those early hints that there might be a market opportunity, is to recognize that we all come to any kind of discussion or analysis with our own perspective. Now, part of the problem is that in all of our lives as we're growing up in kids, we've been conditioned to think in terms of opposites. And everything's kind of a black and white kind of decision-making process, whether that's up or down, big or small, fast or slow, good or bad. The simplistic way that we've been trained to divide everything basically is trying to drive our thinking into equal and opposite groupings. Basically, it's much easier for us to look at two items and make a decision of item A or item B. And in fact, in the consumer market, in some places, businesses have been quite successful in recognizing that if you give too many options to your consumers, they get stalemated. They can't make the decision if you give them 15 options. But in the case of changing our perspective when we are trying to think through or trying to identify weak signals, we need to understand that not everything fits into this kind of shorthanded black and white kind of decision criteria. For instance, in the classic definition of an optimist or a pessimist, an optimist sees the glass of water as half full, while the pessimist sees the water as half empty. But let's recognize that there are many more perspectives that can be applied to the glass and to the water. And this kind of highlights diversity of team members that you need to bring together in order to get all the possible perspectives. And it's that diversity of view, that diversity of perspective, that'll help you identify those weak signals. So what are some of the other perspectives? Well, one is the idealist. So the idealist comes along and says what? Well, the idealist will come along and say that the glass should be full. We all have run into that idealist in our organization. It's not whether it's half full or half empty. It should be full. Versus the realist ignores the condition of the water and just says the glass is. The anarchist says, break the glass. The capitalist wants to sell the glass. The environmentalist wants to protest because they want to save the water. So when you think about it, we tend to think that there's only two perspectives on every item that we're looking at. But the real answer to that is there's not just two perspectives. So whether you're an optimist, a pessimist, an idealist, a realist, an anarchist, capitalist, environmentalist, whatever your perspective is, that's diversity, that's value from the standpoint of trying to identify and search out those weak signals. So we need to push ourselves, we need to push our organizations to find all the sides and all the perspectives to the opportunity. If you do that, then you'll find that weak signal. You'll find the opportunity. You'll find the opportunity in the chaos that exists out there, that only this diversity can bring to it. Moving on to segment 3, the killer question of the week. Now, this killer question actually is one that is in the killer question deck that I have personally that I use when I run ideation or brainstorming sessions. But I pulled this question out specifically in response to an email that I got from a listener. And the email exchange that I've had with this one listener was with regards to the use of extreme customers as a source of ideas, as a source of opportunity for your product or your service. So this week's killer question is, who complains about the limits of my product? So again, who complains about the limits of my product? Now, in many cases, we're open or we're looking for people who give us positive feedback. Oh, it's a great product. They're going to sell like hotcakes. Best thing since sliced bread. And that's all fine and good, and that just reinforces that you've made the right decision. However, what I have found as critical or key to success that I've had with products and services is to listen very, very closely to the people who complain. Particularly finding people who are passionate about your product that they complain the most often. These are the ones that can be really, really annoying. Now, there's some of them that just do it out of being an extreme. But if you find somebody who complains and who's also passionate about your product, that's the feedback that you need to listen to, that you need to tune yourself into. So, who are they? Who are the people that complain about your product? What segment do they belong to? Are they a certain socioeconomic? Or are they coming from a certain geography? Do they come from a certain industry? Do they come from a certain age group? Do they come from a certain affinity to technology or to gadgets or to software? What segment do they belong to? And then why do they complain? It isn't that they got a complaint and you get the first, feedback. Oh, I don't like the way this cursor works, or I can't figure out how this button works. Find out who these people are, go back, have a conversation with them, and continue to ask the next question. I don't like this button, it's hard to read. But why? Well, the font's too small. Well, is it really too small? Or, get to the next question. Figure out what is really the underlying issue that's causing them to complain about your product. And then do the analysis. If you address this complaint, does this open up new markets for you that you hadn't anticipated for? So it isn't just simply who complains about your product, but it's asking the next question. Who are they? What segment do they belong to? Why do they complain? And if you address their complaint, what market would this open? Does this open a completely new market opportunity for your product or service? So again, this week's killer question is, who complains about the limits of my product? And with that, we're going to wrap it up this week, coming right up on 30 minutes. We're going to try to keep it under the 30-minute window. Please keep the emails coming. I truly do appreciate feedback, both positive and negative. Some of you I've had multiple conversations with, so with comments and feedback, constructive criticisms, helps me improve the podcast, brings more value to you. Please let me know that you're listening to the podcast. I'm looking for understanding who the variety. I know I have a number of college students who are listening to it. I actually got an email from a couple of the authors of books that I've recommended on it, which was quite interesting, and I appreciate that. I know I've gotten some emails from executives at other companies, from startups. So I'm interested in understanding the demographics, who's listening to the podcast. So please just drop me an email, let me know that you're listening, and what you do and how you're applying the information that's being shared here. That would be keenly useful. you can drop me an email at podcast@killerinnovations.com, or you can send me a voicemail at 703-636-4460, or you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. And I'll try to keep my Skype status up to date, so you can ring me at 3 o'clock in the morning if I'm in some kind of a weird time zone. Also, thank you for those of you who have gone up and voted on Podcast Alley. If you have not voted, I would encourage you to go visit Podcast Alley, search out your favorite podcast, and vote. The voting on Podcast Alley helps the rest of the new listeners coming into the podcast to see feedback and to identify podcasts that are have been rated or voted by their listeners as being ones that they enjoy. And it's also feedback back to the creators of the podcast. Helps them kind of measure, I shouldn't say measure, but helps them get validation for the time and energies they put in. For a 30-minute podcast, the preparation time can be 8 to 10 hours in gathering the material, preparing to do the podcast, preparing the files, uploading it, not to mention the cost of the hosting infrastructure, which all the podcast producers out there, carry, burden themselves, as far as the cost. So, but we do this out of the passion for podcasting, and also to share with you expertise and knowledge and perspective. I don't claim to have all the answers with regards to creativity and innovation, but hopefully just share with you at least my perspective and hard-earned lessons and scars from the industry. So again, thank you for listening. Please drop me an email, give me feedback. And again, like I said in the beginning, hopefully this weekend we'll get the podcast back on its regular schedule and upload it over the weekend. In the meantime, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.